Now we're going to have a look at the filter section. So now in Dune 3 we have 2 filters, whereas before in Dune 2 there was only 1 filter. So we've got some extra flexibility in terms of our filtering. Now obviously the filter section is located down here, filters 1 and 2. And the filter allows us to sculpt the sound by removing high frequencies or low frequencies, basically sculpting the frequency range within a sound to tailor it to the sound that you're trying to create. So for example, most bass sounds are generally kind of duller and more focused around the low frequencies. And when I say dull, I don't mean boring, I mean lacking in high frequencies. So in order to create a sound which is more fitting for a bass, we could roll off high frequencies, for example. So that at a basic level, that's what the filter is there for. Now the cutoff is the point at which we're going to cut away frequencies. And if we just bring this up into a meter, we'll see that at work. Just arrange these windows. So you can see we're rolling off the higher frequencies. So this isn't going to be a video course on the basics of filtering and subtractive synthesis, but if you're unsure of what the filter does, then definitely check out one of those courses, because it's very useful when it comes to sound design to know what all these things actually do and how they function. So on this filter, as I said, we have a cutoff, we have a resonance for creating a kind of peak around the cutoff point, resonating the cutoff point essentially. We've got the key track control here. Now that determines the amount at which the filter is going to respond to the pitch on the keyboard. Because if you think about it, if we were using a fairly low cutoff point setting and we started playing notes that were quite high up in the musical range, and actually we'd start playing notes that were above the cutoff point and they wouldn't be able to be heard. Whereas with the key track up, you'll hear that those sounds are much more audible, because what it means is essentially the cutoff is going to open as you play higher up the keyboard. We have a drive control that's going to drive the kind of input of the filter, which makes it a bit more saturated and kind of fat sounding. And we also, of course, have our filter modes here. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these because it would take too long, but we have kind of groups of filters here. Now, the clean multi-mode filter is kind of a low CPU footprint filter type, good for just kind of everyday filtering really. But they are based around a kind of analog style filter. We have different slopes here for these. Okay, so the next one we have is the expand down. Now this is more of a saturated filter type, so let's compare like for like. So it's subtle, but it's a little bit fatter sounding. The XP low pass. Then we have a comb filter here. Just turn down our volume here. And this creates kind of spikes in the frequency range. It gives that kind of almost phasey style effect. Good with some resonance up for that one. And then we have these analog model filters, so just various different kind of analog style filters based on other synthesizers filters essentially. We have a very, very strict kind of slope filter, very steep slope. You can kind of see that there. Don't find those kind of filters generally particularly musical sounding, but it's there if you want it. Then we have this transistor ladder section here. Now this is the classic kind of analog filter type, uses more CPU this one. You also have an acid setting for this, it's like a kind of 303. So you can really hear that kind of 303 style sound. 303 is an old Roland synthesizer, kind of very famous in the acid house era. And then we have this Salon key setting here. Now this has kind of a very distorted resonance sound. Let's try this one out. Very kind of saturated setting. And then we have our Dune 1 kind of legacy filter types here. So those are our kind of groups of filters. It's worth just trying those out really and just seeing which one fits the sound better that you've got in your head. And we have a couple of controls here that allow us to decide whether we want the sound to be made up of just filter 1 or just filter 2 or a balance between the two, so we can kind of seamlessly move between them. And also we can actually link the parameters together. So if we wanted to have two different filter types, for example, and we wanted to hear them equally, we could do that with the balance. We can link them together, which means we can move both of the filters simultaneously, which is quite useful. Okay, so in addition, let's show this off link, to having these filter types here, we also have a series of different effects that we can add in as well. Let's just lose this window here. We can dial in the amount of the effect using this amount control, and we've also got a low pass as well. And let's try some light distortion. Let's try hard distortion. You can really hear that work there. We can kind of roll it off a little bit using the low pass. So we've got loads of different options here. Bit crush effect, sample rate reduction. Let's have a look at some of these down here. We've got formant, and also a vowel setting. That creates kind of spikes that mimic the human voice and kind of vowel sounds, as you can hear there. Pretty cool. Now what we also have here is the ability to determine the amount the envelope is going to affect the filter. So let's just reset once again. Let's bring down our filter cutoff here, and let's create a filter envelope which has a fast decay, and then let's bring up the envelope amount. So you can hear that at work there. So we can determine the amount the envelope is going to open the filter. Okay, and that's the same for filter 2 as well. In fact, all these controls are obviously the same for filter 2 as well. Okay, so to finish off, I just want to have a look at the routing section here. Now the routing section allows us to configure the way that filter 1, filter 2 and the insert effects are routed essentially. So let's say we wanted to have the sound passing through filter 1, then through the insert effect, and then through filter 2. Well, we can do that here. You can see this is the routing. So let's bring in something here, a bit crusher. Let's bring down the low pass, bring up the amount. You can clearly hear a bit crush sound going on there. But let's now say we wanted to roll off some of the high frequencies here. Let's bring the balance across. We've now got that dialed in using that routing. Now let's say we wanted to go through filter 1 and filter 2 and then through the insert effect. So let's put a comb filter here, and let's put something different here. Let's try a acid low pass with some resonance. Just turn down the volume here. In fact, let's add a little bit of movement here. So let's go source, FO1, destination, filter 1 cutoff. Okay, so now we're going filter 1, filter 2, then through the effects. So let's choose a vowel here. So now we've got the output of filter 1 passing through filter 2 and then passing through our effects. So we've got 6 different ways that we can configure the filters and the insert effects to work. And it's really important because obviously distorting a filtered sound is going to add extra harmonics, whereas filtering a distorted sound is going to remove harmonics. So try and think around whether you want to kind of really hear the insert effects or use the insert effects to add saturation and drive the filter further. Okay, so now we've covered the filter section. Let's just wrap up on the filter envelope. Now, I'm sure we're all familiar with what envelope controls are: attack, decay, sustain, release. We have an added one here, which is analog. Now, this allows us to create really snappy kind of attacks. So let's just create a little attack here. In fact, let's reset the sound before we do that. Easier to hear. So you can hear it's got that extra little snap to it when we bring in that analog control there. Okay, so that wraps up our filters and our filter envelope. So to recap, we have an additional filter in June 3, filter 2. We have the same settings for both here. We went through all the different categories for our filtering, which is kind of different flavors mostly of low pass, band pass, high pass, etc. We know the filter cutoff is the point at which we cut away the frequencies. Resonance allows us to create a peak. The key track allows us to open the filter using MIDI if we're playing notes that are above the cutoff point. Drive allows us to drive extra saturation in. The envelope amount we know is routing how much the envelope is going to affect the filter. We have some insert effects that we can add in as well, and the way these are routed is determined by these little kind of algorithmic diagrams. And remember, we have an extra low pass for the insert effects as well. That is our filters covered. In the next video, we're going to have a look at the amplitude envelope and also our very important common voices edit section here. So I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.